So I'm currently developing from Windows 10, and what I'm going to do is get a Docker environment running for developing with Cake PHP on a remote Linux host. So the first thing we do is install our remote SSH ability into our VS Code. And I already have, if I have a look at the configuration, we have a look at the configuration file. I've got a remote host configured. I've got public key authentication working, and so now all I need to do is go connect and select the remote host. Now notice how it's asking me for a password. So what it's doing at the moment is hopefully this will work. Yes, it's worked. So what it's doing at the moment is it's using password authentication. I don't like that. It causes all sorts of problems for the future. So on the Linux host, just go into your SSH directory as that user that you're connecting as, and you're going to need to add an entry for this file. So what we need to do is we need to open a local folder on our Windows PC, which is underneath our user profile and the SSH folder, and in there we've got our private key and our public key. Now what we need to do is we just need to select all that text in the public key there, and then switch to our window that is connected to our remote Linux host, and then just I usually right mouse and then it just pastes it from the clipboard. And so we now have SSH authentication available. So let's try that. VS Visual Studio Code, and we've got our Remote Explorer, and then we say we want to connect to that remote host, and it's now authenticated using public key authentication, which is a lot easier than putting passwords in every time. So that's our remote host. What is good is you don't develop straight inside your home directory. Usually you create a directory to hold all your sites and those sorts of things. So you create a directory to install Cake from. Now if you are going to go to full Docker, you could probably jump straight to Docker, but we're going to bootstrap ourselves to Docker, so we're going to go through the process of getting PHP on this server. So at the moment you can see there's nothing there. So we're going to get it running enough so that we can install Cake to start with. So I'm going to go apt-get install. I'm going to install Composer, which is the PHP dependency installer. And I don't commit to memory anything that okay, so we go Cake PHP installation, and using PHP Composer we just go right. So we're now installing Cake PHP into that path. Now notice we've just had a failure there, don't know why. but I'm just going to remove the cake directory that we were creating and just try it again. Now when you're developing inside a brand new virtual machine, or you're connecting across the network and the configuration is different, sometimes small things get in the way, and sometimes they're a big problem and you don't understand why. Other times it's just try it again and see. So that's going to take a little while. So while that's downloading and installing, let's now start to install some of the other dependencies that we're going to need to install to use Docker on the remote Linux host. So they can get going there. Let's see what's we've returned. All right, so notice I've tried this again and it's saying that I'm missing dependencies. I can't install these dependencies. I can't install Cake without these missing dependencies. So what that'll mean is you have to say, okay, I'm going to have to install maybe PHP XML, PHP PDO, PHP MySQL. What about, you might say, okay, I want to do some graphics processing, GD, or you might want the ability to do remote web requests or that sort of stuff. So install your dependencies as needed to get yourself running. And let's have a look at our other screen. Have we finished? Yes, we've finished Docker.io. Now let's see. Now that's good. So we've got Docker running and we have permissions. Now sometimes what will happen, that's interesting. Okay, so that works well. The user, that Docker Compose, does that work? Good. So we've got Docker and Docker Compose installed. That will be the foundation of getting our Docker environment running for Cake PHP. And now we have finished. We can now, let's clear that directory again because it failed last time. And let's create a Cake PHP project again. Hopefully this time we've got everything we need to get ourselves running. And say yes to create and set folders. Now once that's done, you can do your testing by starting Cake PHP's internal server. And VS Code is really clever in that it allows you to port forward everything from that remote Linux box to the local host. And so I've just connected there and I've gone, oh, okay, I'm still missing one dependency, so I'll just close that and kill the server and go back to here. And I know that actually with Linux, I'm not sure if it's like that. With Linux with Cake PHP on the debug kit module or the plugin, it needs SQLite because that's using debug kit uses that. So let's try that again. So now we have everything installed. It's working using Cake's internal server, but we want to go to Docker now, don't we? Now at the moment, if we open our folder, open our Cake PHP Explorer here, not Cake PHP, the VS Code Explorer, there's no folder open, there's no workspace. So we want to specify to VS Code that our workspace is this cake development, and yes to trust things. Now what are we going to do here? Well, we're going to do Docker compose cake PHP for setup, and the features we're going to install is Mailhog, MySQL, Nginx, and what else do we need? Oh, of course we need a... What else do we need? Ah, yes, we need PHP and specifically PHP FPM. So that's where we're heading, and we're going to use Docker compose YAML file to do that. Alright, so that's where we're going to head from here, and because I haven't scripted this, I seriously don't know all the different problems that are going to come up, but we're going to do our best to overcome them as we step through. Now to start with, we need a Docker compose file here, Docker compose YAML. Now at the moment on this remote computer we don't have, there's nothing on it other than our cake PHP directory. So what I want to do is not reinvent the wheel. So on Windows here I've copied, if we look at this in VS Code, I've copied some sort of skeleton configuration and we will use all this to flesh out our Docker environment. But because it's not specifically written currently for this cake PHP installation, there's going to be tweaks. So that's half the joy, really, isn't it, of figuring out how it's all going to fit together. So to get our files from our Windows PC to our Linux PC, how do we do that? What's one way of doing that? So usually everyone uses, that I know of, uses FileZilla. So we create a new connection. We actually don't want that one, so this is to a different server. This is our dev server. We enter the and we can use we can just use a password, it doesn't matter. And I think that's going to be incorrect if I don't do it like this. Let's try that. So okay, so there's our dev folder and there's our cake folder. So we'll copy across this Docker folder and then we'll look at the contents, and then in the root of this we're going to copy up a Docker compose YAML file. You can see the YAML extension and an env file that's going to hold the configuration for Docker compose. So that's done. Now that's done, you can, if it doesn't show up, you can click the refresh button and it will. Let's go in and have a look at all the different things that we've got in this YAML file. So we've got our services here, so we're going to make sure that we can install Nginx. What's our next one? We've got a PHP configuration here. We've got a MySQL server, and because we want persistence, we are creating a volume in this Linux instance that's going to stay there. It's not going to go away every time we up and down or remove the containers, the Docker containers. So if you have a look at the MySQL instance, you find that it's mapping this Docker volume to the MySQL data directory. And that's one of the crucial things. Now let's go here and change this, because we're going to call this dev test so that we know. So we're creating a network called dev test as well, and all these different Docker images are going to be available over that dev test network as well. So what are these $ brackets things do? Well, when Docker Compose runs, so when you run Docker Compose and you run up and down, what it does, it sources a .env file that's in the same directory as the Docker Compose file. So here you have the ability to basically give yourself variation. So if you're running multiple Docker installations and Docker Compose files on your machine, you're going to get port collisions. So you just set it up like this so that you specify an environment variable and then it will pass through that instead of the default, so you won't have issues. So here we have Nginx container, and it's just going to pull the latest from the Docker registry. We're saying that we want the Nginx port to be 8073 and that we're mapping our Docker config Nginx site file into the container to create the default site config. So let's have a look at that. So we go Docker config, we can see Nginx site config, and we're saying, okay, so when we map var in the Docker container, when we map the current directory, which is where all these files into this file, when we're serving it from Nginx, we're actually going to serve the Nginx path web root. So we're actually going to serve this web directory and this index PHP by Nginx. And that is basically then going to, in the Nginx container, we're going to say, okay, if the file ends with PHP, pass it to the PHP container on this port. And that PHP container, if we continue scrolling down, is here. Now notice that it was configured to just use an image from the Docker registry, but there wasn't enough stuff in that Docker registry container or that image to help allow PHP to run. So what we've had to do, we've had to say, okay, it's no longer an image. We want you to build using the context, so change to this directory basically, and then build an image using the Docker file that you find there. So let's have a look at that Docker file. Go up, go into PHP and the Docker file, and we're saying, okay, we're still building a PHP FPM image, so we pull that from the Docker registry, but now I'd like you to start installing a heap of different dependencies that are just nice to have for a Kate PHP development environment, including we want a version of Node. We want to install Xdebug. We want to install all these other extensions that are just required for developing with Cake PHP. So we have a number of different places that we've got these variables. This is the MySQL container. It's set up so that what's its port? So you would connect to this port externally to get onto it, and then you would then connect into the container. So from that external port, forward DB port, what was it again? 3310, you would then connect to the MySQL instance on the default port. And it's got a few things in here that basically set it up so that you can connect to it successfully using a number of different authentication details. So you've got a DB, standard DB user, and then you've also got a DB root password, which is currently the same thing as this DB password dev test. All right, so what happens when we endeavor to run this? Never run it before, and let's do that. Let's just run install Docker. There we go, the Docker extension. We are going to need that. So what happens now when we run this Docker Compose against this file? Well, the first thing we might need to do is we've got an issue here with we need to build a Docker container. So I'm just going to type in Docker Compose build and see what happens. Right, so what's happened there? Now it looks like we're having trouble It's saying permission denied. I wonder why it's saying that. So that's an interesting one. Okay. Again saying permission denied. So why would it be saying permission denied? Well, let's try that. So I'm going to go user mod, going to append a supplementary group Docker to my current user. I'm not sure if this is going to fix it. And then I'm just going to say, okay, Control Shift P for Windows, and just say, let's reload the window. So reconnecting to the remote Linux instance, and now see whether that's let's have a look. Docker PS. That's interesting. It hasn't. Let's double check our command. So we're looking for maybe we need to change up the So maybe we need to choose append on this side and then go look at the groups. There we go. Let's try that again. And okay, it's not, I think the reload window is not working, so what we'll do, we'll just close. We'll close and then restart VS Code and it will automatically log back in. Maybe the server component needs to restart as well. Let's now look, group. Wonder if system control. It's running. Okay, so what's our issue? User mod supplementary group. Oh no, it's there. Okay, why is it? Now let's see what it's doing. Alright, so I think we needed to do a, so it must have been, yeah, so even the reload and reconnection was not doing it for us. We needed to actually do a login. Let's try it all again and see what, let's go to dev, cake, whoops, and see what we can go. Docker, compose, up. Now, so what it's now doing, we've just said Docker compose up, and it's now going into our YAML file and trying to complete the configuration of that I'm requesting. So basically, in the end, we should end up with a built fully working Docker Compose environment. Not, it won't take forever. It's just going to feel like it. Now, in our Docker file configurations, we have a bunch of tweaks, if you like. So we're just waiting. It looks like we're a bit resource starved because this is all running in a remote VMware workstation running on a single machine. So it's a little bit busy. So it goes through, pulls all the images down from the remote machine. But notice here we've also got things that we pull out of the container and then we sort of feed them back in to give us what we need to run each container. So you'll find oftentimes now with Cake PHP and just about every development environment that there'll be node dependencies on some of the plugins and those sorts of things. So you need to use them, install node, and usually in your PHP container. All right. So MailHog is awesome. It gives you, an SMTP server basically that you can send email to and immediately see the results. And it's like having an SMTP server that you don't have to access remotely. So it's great for local development. Getting close now. It's only a couple of minutes. Alright, so that's pretty good. We've got our MySQL instance, we've got Cake, MailHog, PHP, Nginx. Now notice that what it's done, it's actually used the parent directory name to prefix all these images. So it just makes them easy to... So let's have a look at those running images. And it seems like everything's worked pretty well. So if, like me, you forget, okay, what's everything running on, let's start to look at a few of these services. So let's try the first one, which is, might try this, let's try it. If it works, we'll be hunky-dory. But let's see if it works. So basically, I'm on Windows 10. Let's see. Okay, well that's a good sign. So on Windows 10, and I know that on the Linux host it'll be publishing Nginx on this port, and so I'm just saying, well, on that remote host, just grab that port and forward it back to your Windows 10. Now what we've just seen here is normal, because what you have, so it's complaining about permissions in the temp directory. Have a look at the temp directory as it stands now. It's owned by me, and although a lot of it is correctly permissioned and it's world writable, some of the things aren't. So what I need to do, I need to change the permissions on temp and logs and change them so they're world writable. So once I do that, let's see what happens. Okay, very good. So we now have everything working. We've got our Nginx instance successfully passing information back to the PHP FPM instance, and that's really good. But we're still currently connected via SSH to just the Linux box, but we can actually go and tunnel into our we can actually tunnel into our Docker instance on the other computer and connect to them directly. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to choose close remote connection. And connect back. And here I've installed my Docker container, but you notice here that there's a bit of an issue with, let's have a look and see if it's still a problem. Yeah, do you notice how even though I've logged out and logged back in, that it's still not picking up my membership in the Docker group? So notice when I actually do a proper login that I then pick up Docker. So I don't exactly know how to fix this, but what I'm going to do is reboot this remote instance. So I'm rebooting the Linux host, and then if I go back to this one, this is Windows 10, and I go, I think it might be 22. Let's see if we can now reconnect. It may or may not be a fast reboot. No, it was. So now, notice that I do have membership in the Docker group, which gives me permission to access the Docker PID file and the pipe and all that sort of stuff. So notice what's running in my remote machine now. I've got Nginx, got Cake PHP instance, and I've got Mailhog and MySQL. So what I'm going to do is it doesn't come up. That's interesting. Right. So normally, which I can't see it at the moment, there would be an ability to connect to the Docker image, but for some reason, and this I can do, I can go straight into the Docker shell there, but for some reason I can't actually connect to, and maybe that's due to the fact that this Windows instance does not have Docker installed itself. So the question is, yep, good. So the question is, let's try that. I might just file, close the remote connection. I've got so many code windows open. Let's reopen and use our Remote Explorer. And that's interesting as well. So we've only got, let's see if we have a missing that's what we want. All right, let's see. That's what we're missing, remote containers. So let's install this remote containers option, and I'm just going to connect. There we go, that's what we were missing. So I'm going to connect to my remote Linux host, and see, there we go. So now we have the ability to, if I right mouse button, attach to container. So attach in window or attach to container. I'm going to choose attach to container. Got it. And now what does this do? Well, it opens the remote container, and you're now, that's your development environment. You're inside the container, and you can now develop inside there. So let's click the button here and open, and notice the differences. So firstly, we're running as root, which some people might say that's terrible, but so let me go, let's go into here, and here we can see our Cake PHP development environment. So it's now changed to not be from your home directory when it's normally with SSH, but now we have a full Cake PHP development environment running inside our container. So I'll just close down all these other windows, and let's start to look at getting, we're inside the container, we're inside the actual PHP container here, and we can now start to look at, well, what do we get? Go, okay, and what's good about this? Well, we can start to run our PHP utilities, but we're inside the PHP container. We know how it's configured, and we can obviously have a unique container with different configuration settings for each development framework that we've got. So let's start to make use of these different containers. Firstly, let's connect to the dashboard port on Mailhog. Now at the moment we're inside a container, and we're in the PHP container, so we can't just forward a port because that simply will not work because we're not in the container that we want to. But we do know that every single one of these containers is publishing an external port that we can connect to. So let's connect to, we know the IP address of the remote Linux host, so connect to 18.22, and we know that the port that's running Mailhog is this one. So that's our Mailhog instance, so we can connect to it, to the Linux host. We've got access to Mailhog. What we don't have is an ability to currently, let's download MySQL Workbench. Seems that no, we don't want Workbench Edition, we want Community Edition. Let's go find it. Downloads. No, we don't want Enterprise Edition. There we go, Community Edition. We want MySQL Workbench Community Edition because we're not buying an enterprise license. We want it for Microsoft Windows. Good. Start my download. Couple of seconds, and so we're in. So while we're installing that, let's have a look at which port we need to connect to. The forward DB port is this one. So again, let's go back and remind ourselves how that works. Oh, that's interesting. It's not that one. So it looks like that's not quite correct. I've got myself confused there. Oh, that's NGINX. No wonder I'm looking at the wrong thing. So let's have a look at it. Yeah, so the forward DB port is 33, externally it's 3310 or 3310, yeah, but internally it's 3306. So what we're going to do here is install MySQL Workbench and then connect as the root user, but with the correct password here. Okay, good. Launch MySQL Workbench. So then we go, okay, let's connect to, we're going over SSH and we're connecting to our dev instance. We want to connect to 10.18.18.22. The user, that's the SSH user, let's see, I wonder if there is an option to use SSH, and that's our key file there. And I think it's 3310. So let's test our connection. Okay. See what's going on there. Don't really know if I forgot. I think I'm using a different username. Alright, so we're struggling to get, let's clear that. Try again. Let's see if it works by password authentication. It does. And then I think it's dev test is the password. Okay, so we've successfully made, so it didn't work out, SSH key didn't work, but our password does, and that's okay. So now let's connect to and notice what we've got in. So we've got a dev test, and we look at our users and privileges, and we've got a dev test user. So let's get our database connected. I'm going to hold Alt down, and I'm just going to click before each one of these, and just save that. And then we're going to look at, so again, if we were doing this via, I think that's the wrong port. I think it might be 83, is it? Yeah, it is. So now, let's have a look. Cake PHP is not able to connect to the database. Now, why would that be? Well, our problem is, let's go back to our, explain this a little bit. So we're in, whenever we're trying to connect to MySQL, it's because a PHP script is trying to connect to it. So the PHP script is being interpreted on the PHP container, and then it's, what it needs to do, it needs to use this link to the MySQL container in order to be able to log into the database. Now the database is this host name, MySQL. So if I go into, currently in the PHP container, and if I go ping, okay, apt-get install, I can never remember, but Ubuntu ping install iputils underscore ping. Sorry. So we go apt-get update. So these new containers won't have any of the files that's needed to do this. So you've got to update them. Now install, and then do this. Right, so can you see what it's done? It's basically got an alias to this service name, and at the moment this script is saying connect to localhost, which is the wrong place. So we need to change the host for the database connection to the MySQL host. Now let's see what happens when we refresh, and we can see now that Cake PHP has the ability to connect to the database. Alright, so we now have a working connection to our database tables. What more do we need now? Well, let's have a look at our, well, what we might do, just very quickly. We're in a PHP container, and let's do the typical post table, and this is very quick, but we'll just go this table posts, and then go add column, and we'll go title, and it's a string, and add column, body string, and create. Alright, so that looks good. So go bin, cake, migrations. Oh, this doesn't work. Migrate. And then we go bin, cake, bake all. And we want to bake models, views, controller. So if I now go to my development environment here and type in posts, I'll have an ability to go test and create a post. Let's now create something else to test our mail sending ability. So bin, cake, bake. I'll do a help there, and what I'm wanting to do is I want to bake a mailer, and I'll go post mailer. Okay, so if we now go back here into our source folder, we'll find a posts mailer. Oh, don't like that at all, so I'm going to delete it. That looks terrible, so let's change it because it appends the yeah, that's better, post mailer. Now let's find our post controller, and let's pretend that if we successfully that we want to send. Now this is an issue. We don't have PHP IntelliFence, so we're not actually seeing what we want to. So let's install that. We're not getting our nice auto completion. So what this is doing, it's actually installing the IntelliFence into the container. Just got to be aware of where you are when these sorts of things are happening. And now the config, let's go and check that. So we'll go down here, and it's currently set to default to go to localhost, but as we know from, let's have a look at Docker Compose again, as we know, each individual container has its own address. So we need to specify mailhog as the host name, and if we have a look at our .env file and we go down to mailhog, there we find the mail port. If we go back to here, okay, so it's the forward mailhog port is 1025. Let's go have a look at forward mail hog port. No, it's this one, 1027. So be very careful because you can get yourself into strife. But let's have a look. We'll set that port. Mailhog doesn't need usernames and passwords, so we're all good to go there. And let me try this. Alright, so new mailer, and I want to set the subject, hi YouTube. What else? Can we, I wonder, I think it returns itself, doesn't it? Maybe it doesn't. Mailer, set to, and we want the email, so, and then we want James, my name, and then we'll do, and we go, this is a test of the mailer. Right, let's hope this works, but we'll go to our post controller now. We'll create a new post. We go test of mailer, test of mailer. So what is the issue here? Okay. So what could be the issue there? Let's reveal in Explorer. Just go down to email. What could be the issue there? Alright, let's try and make a change there. Maybe let's tell it that we definitely want it to be sent via okay, so that's even better. So now it knows that, have we made oh, no, we don't need to do that because I think all we need to actually be in, let's have a look here. Yeah, inside the container it's 1025 and we're connecting to it inside the container if you like. So try that one more time. Test, test, and go over to Mailhog, and yeah, we've now got a working email test. So, all right. So what further have we got? Done everything we set out to do. Got a database. We've got a PHP. We've got Nginx. Yeah, and now we're developing inside the container, the PHP container. Well, something that's always a challenge when developing, well, I've found it is anyway, is getting debugging working. So let's have a look at that. We've largely got debugging already set up, so we'll just close all these screens, but just have a look at this because it will show you what's already been done to set things up. So we open up the PHP container and have a look at the PHP ini file. Go down the bottom, and actually VS, I don't believe that's necessary, but I did that in the past, but this, I'm going to leave it there. So we have already got this set up inside our container, and we know that because we know that it's already set up. If we go start with request, it's already set, and if we looked at expose IDE, same deal. So it's that's already being mapped into the container using the Docker Compose YAML. So in PHP, we can see that Docker config PHP ini file is being mapped into the container. So PHP is already configured to have Xdebug running. So what do we need to do to get it running inside the container? Again, type in the extension name, install it into the container, and this is where, so we've already done this section. Now this is where we need to then start to figure out, well, okay, how do we debug these sorts of things? So let's go into our post controller and we'll choose our index view, and let's imagine that we want to do a break at this point. So we press the run and debug button, and we create our launch.json, and this is the section that we're looking for, listen for Xdebug. Once we've created launch.json, we can click the listen for Xdebug option. Now notice that process has started in the PHP container, and it's automatically said, hey, I've just noticed a process starting the container, do you want to forward it to nothing? So we know Xdebug's running. Let's stop that and start it again, just so that you know that's. And that if we access our index page, which is the same thing as, so this is the same thing as this. Notice that it works. So pretty cool, huh? So that's all we need to get Xdebug working. I have seen in some instances where you've got to do sort of a workspace mapping, but I think that's only required when one side of the equation is in maybe SSH, and then the other side of the equation it's actually being run inside a container, and then there's different paths. So, but because I think because both we're inside the container and the container paths aren't changing, so it's always what is it in this container? Path is always that plus wherever it's going, then it's not an issue. So that's Xdebug within a container as well. And we'll stop our Xdebug there. One of the final things I'd like to cover is version control. And we're currently inside the container. So if we develop inside the container, we sort of really need the ability to run Git. So that's as simple as apt-get install, but you certainly want to make sure that any changes that you make to your container, and you want to keep them for the next time it reboots, that you don't cause yourself issues. So git status, let's have a look. So we can run git init, git. So we need to do user.name, and git config global user.email. This, it will not let you upload anything or to GitHub if you don't do this. So git add, and if we now have a look, I think we might need to reload the window perhaps if we do that. Let's see what happens. There we go. So we have our changes stage. Now we could go git commit add here as well from the command line, but we can also go and just tick the box and that. Now VS Code makes it very easy to get connected to these different okay, so oh, I just made a mistake, but we might need to delete that repositories. Oh goodness, it's a bit frightening, isn't it? need to go and grab our, let's open that and settings, and I'll rename it to, what do we call this? Cake PHP for Mailhog Nginx PHP. And yeah, that's good enough. So now I'm assuming, now if we look at vim, no, git remote, yeah, so we're going to have an issue. We'll have to rename that. And then we have to add it again. Remote, add remote. No, let's do that. Let's see what it, yeah. Now that should, when we look at it, yep, okay. So pretty much that's the process of going from a Docker Compose file to having multiple containers running and being able to develop inside a container and on a remote Linux host with Xdebug running and a few containers that basically provide like mail service and those things which can really help your development experience.